What was the most ed-up thing you saw at your school? Someone used a deer carcass to tie the front doors together so no one could get in the school. Pretty sure someone threw a deer carcass through a rival school's window. Basically, someone threw the other school's mascot through the window. Their team was the Bucks. And this is Philly suburbs. Middle school, girl had the sewing machine needle go right through her finger, the left with the needle and thread just hanging out. Another kid had an X-Acto knife stabbed right into his wrist by accident, so close to the artery. High school, girl was run over by a bus. It backed over her, then pulled forward over her again. We had fundraisers and pep rallies for her. She made a full recovery and is still playing sports at almost 40 now. In the bathroom, endangered turtle was found during construction. All construction had to stop until the turtle moved out. PE teacher, you know how that one goes. In woodworking CL, one kid managed to stick a marking knife straight through his palm. Doing that without ing up your tendons is pretty lucky. Couple of months later, new kid was asking how he managed to do something so stupid. So while he was describing the incident, yup, did it again. Same place. Funnily enough, he wasn't the clumsiest or most stupid guy there by a long shot. I know how the Parisi teacher goes. Years after little sis and I graduated, the one who taught my sister was arrested. Pedo, kitty images and videos, and he was making some of the students prostitutes so he could pay his gambling debts. When his wife found out, she beat the hell out of him, called the cops and had them meet him at the hospital, filed for divorce and won everything. He's not so happy now. Turned out the cops were going to arrest him that day, but ended up slapping cuffs on him while he was in a hospital bed. They were making a case against him for a few weeks by that point. I had a sewing machine needle go through my finger in college as I forgot to put the guard down. It made a huge bang and I shouted, so everyone looked at me and the needle had broken off, just stuck in my finger and I was weirdly chill. Adrenaline, I guess. The teacher started flapping and started talking about going to the hospital and I was all nah, I'm not waiting for ages for them to just pull it out, so I just dead calmly pulled it out and asked for a bandage. I was already a weirdo in that class group and I'm pretty sure that solidified it. They all looked at me like I was nuts. The ambulance in front of the school because two guys glued their eyelids shut with a quick dry adhesive. Sounds like my workplace, early 90s, went to the chemie lab to get them to make me some glue and was told to not sniff it. They even wrote on it not to do so. Fair enough. Got back to my office, put it on my desk, went to make a brew, came back and two engineers were flat out on the floor, and the glue was spilt open on the table. Sigh. Some kids were punching a mason jar lid that we used to seal a jar with some bug in it. They were doing it as some sort of who's tougher test. When the teacher sees this and sees they have small scratches on their knuckles, she proceeds to tell them that the big was poisonous, and they will die very soon since they drew blood punching the lid. We were maybe 10 at the time. She made them write goodbye notes to their parents and make goodbye speeches to Kel. We were all tripping because we believed her too. It was wild. This sounds like something my brother would tell me when we were kids, such as the recorded bear growls played on a local bear-themed amusement park ride were real audio recordings of a man being mauled by a bear. The condensation on the windows in a bus we were on might build up so much that we would drown before we got where we were going. The dead scorpion encased in epoxy he had in his room was actually alive, and he could free it somehow and send it at me if I annoyed him too much. Those rockets on display at the Space Museum, they forgot to drain the fuel, so if you stand underneath them there's a chance they will ignite and turn you into charred bits. And of course the classic, if you accidentally eat an apple seed you'll slowly die and become an apple tree. When I was 7-8, my parents put out poison traps because we had ants. While getting a drink in the kitchen, I saw an ant on the counter and squished it with my finger. I casually mentioned it to my mom only for her to tell me that, because I didn't wash my hands, that means I ingested the poison and was going to die. I spent 2 hours crying in my room until she told me to drink a glass of milk to neutralize the poison. I wonder if this is related to the crippling entomophobia I had during my teen years. I remember a similar thing happened in my freshman art cal. A kid at the back of the class was asking around him for anyone who had scissors and no one did. So he expanded his search by asking others at tables further away. Except he didn't get up, he just yelled across the kel. He knew the kid at my table and asked nicely, mind you, "Hey, you got any scissors over there?" My friend grabbed a pair and mocked like he was going to throw them clear across the room at him. The kid didn't flinch, he just stares. My friend still has the scissors held up in a throwing position and is waiting for some response. The kid says, "Go for it," without showing that he's intending on catching them. It seems more like a dare, so my friend chucks the scissors at him from across the room. The kid was sitting clear at the back of the room against the wall, and the scissors stuck into the corkboard right next to his head like a knife-throwing act at the circus. Kid didn't even flinch, just sat there staring at my friend. It was silent. Those that didn't see what happened asked others what was going on. Those that saw it didn't know whether to laugh it off or worry about a scissor fight. The teacher walks in. I might have failed to mention she was out of the room during this. Kid reaches up and pulls the scissors out of the corkboard like that's just where scissors are stored. I had a boy in my class when I was around 14 who, when the teacher left the classroom, used to take all the classroom scissors out of the wooden storage block and throw them across the room with as much force as possible. It was terrifying, and I still can't understand how everyone made it out of there unscathed. He did plenty of other similar things too. There are plenty of people I went to school with who I didn't like or didn't get along with, but this guy genuinely terrified me. I dreaded any time a teacher would leave the room, no matter how briefly, because he was completely unpredictable and frankly very dangerous. Not saw, but I did experience the aftermath. A kid at our school died once while out on a school camp. They were way out in the Australian outback. The teachers made barbecue for the kids, and one of the boys, for some reason, ate the food without asking what was in them, even though his parents had filled out his permission form indicating clearly that he had food allergies. Hardcore anaphylaxis. Throat swelled shut, fell to the ground, foaming. School nurse stabbed him with every single EpiPen they had in the medical kit. Nothing, nada, zip, all happened. Picked him up, threw him in the van, and sped out of the campsite at top speed down the road. They were so far out in the middle of nowhere that there's no phone reception. Can't do anything. Can't call for an ambulance, helicopter, nothing. Finally got to the nearest town, called emergency services. Helicopter arrived, loaded the kid onto it, started treatment, flew straight back to town. Never made it, dead before the chopper landed. I was working at the school at the time. I had a job offered by the school to graduates, which I accepted, and found out all the details from the school nurse. This is why it's important to not use weird recipes at social events. I have a friend with a tree nut allergy that almost died at a Christmas party because someone put nuts in the mashed potatoes. I would never, ever expect kebabs to have tree nuts in them. My allergy friend usually goes for kebabs, burgers, and steaks because the dish is mostly meat with a couple veggies. It's totally on the school for making the only food available deadly. Was the kid just not supposed to eat for days? At least list the damn ingredients somewhere. Allergic kids can read ingredients lists by like 4th grade and do so religiously. In 1981, I was in grade 4 and we had a sadistic teacher. She'd beat us for any reason. The worst I saw were 2 incidents. The first was when she caned a boy on his palm. She thrashed his hand until the skin broke and blood gushed out. The second was when she called a boy up to the blackboard to solve a maths problems. Poor boy was so terrified he froze. She grabbed him by the neck and smashed his head against the blackboard several times. She regularly did this to him and eventually he ended up in hospital with a serious concussion. She taught there for many years and no one ever did anything about her. This was in South Africa and back then teachers were considered untouchable by most parents. If you came home complaining that a teacher hit you, you'd probably get another thrashing because the teacher was always right. She's dead by now and I hope she's burning in the deepest reaches of hell. I had a teacher in 3rd grade, not as sadistic, but she was in her last year of teaching and she ended up with the worst troublemakers and bullies. These kids had a major reputation and either were kids who were extremely disruptive, violent, or both. A lot of them were also spoiled and never listened to a word anyone said, except for a few, including me. I was painfully shy, a bully target, and practically trained to listen and obey the teacher and to kick it off. I had a disability. And the ringleader actually threatened me in the past to beat the out of me because my mom kicked her out of our house for being such a spoiled bully. Of course, the teacher looked for a target to get the class to focus on. She picked me up and outright bullied me for months. She videotaped herself screaming at me and the outright bullying and abuse her classmates did to me with her encouragement. She also helped form a club just despising me and had the whole class sign up, including my best friend at the time. My second grade math teacher in a private school in Catalonia 2002 used to throw stuff at girls when we got an answer wrong. He would also yell at us and pull our hair. One time he grabbed a boy by the uniform's collar, lifted him to his height and pinned him against a wall. While yelling at him, he was stupid. I was a foreigner and had just arrived to that school, but told my parents right away. They talked to the principal, then the principal to him. He kept his job and kept on yelling and throwing stuff. To this day, I'm horrible at math. I get freaking nervous every time. Curious where you grew up. Growing up, I saw similar cases of extreme bullying, but only on Western TV, and thought surely it's not real. Like I can't fathom how adults could raise kids who thought that was okay or even funny. I remember around 7-10 my school had a bunch of anti-bullying campaigns and speakers came to the school to talk about how it's wrong. I guess we had a surge of bullying cases and the school took action. But at that time my idea of a bully was someone who pulled your hair or called you names. Laughing at a failed suicide attempt? These kids sounds like they come straight from hell? Let's not even talk about the adults involved. 2 people having in the disabled bathroom stall and someone filming it and spreading it around the school. The girl tried to herself after. 2 kids savagely making out in the bathrooms, some Duca bag friends secretly recording them, and then a city-level leak. Seriously, every teenager in town had seen that video. It was like part of our teenager folklore. Awful. The girl never came back to school. I think she was homeschooled after that. We know she tried to herself, because her therapist, who also was the school therapist, told us. By the way, the kids were like 13 and 16. At my school, I saw sort of the reverse of that. One of my teachers was an abusive hole who had a tendency to hit and threaten kids he deemed to be misbehaving, even just fairly mild typical kid stuff. Until one week when this teacher calls out sick for a couple days and returns to class with a black eye, swollen jaw, slight limp, and a 1,000-yard stare like he'd just got back from a tour in Nam or something. I'd never seen a person's demeanor change so drastically overnight, and from then on he never laid a finger or raised his voice to anyone. The official story we were given was that he'd been in a bad car accident. The actual story is that he had hit the wrong kid. Or more accurately, he had hit a kid with the wrong dad. The kind of dad who knows people that settle disputes by showing up at your house late at night to talk. Whatever they did to this guy was enough to put him in the hospital, convince him not to file a police report, and make up a fake car accident story for the school. He left his position and moved to a different city at the end of the year. There was a kid I knew, I don't know how or why, or if it was his dad's or grandpa, but the brought a grenade to school to show me. It was when we were leaving school. Guy just opens his backpack and lets me take a look, and sure enough it was there. My grandpa had given me an empty, but real grenade from his service days. It was a neat little slice of history, but not much of a toy. Open hole at the bottom. Usually I'd stick it onto my finger and swirl it around in little circles until I'd drop it on myself while reading. Very silly, but a middle school friend was huge into war gear and offered to trade it to me for a sweet water gun. So like any 6th grade idiot, I brought my grenade to school and traded it. Except my school had instituted a zero-tolerance policy. My friend who had a real grenade got expelled. I, who had a functional gun, got nothing whatsoever. A teenager got onto high school roof and jumped off to his death. According to the story, he was being wally abused by the principal and making the teenager's life a living hell. The other teachers knew about what was happening, but nobody said anything or helped him. This happened at the school I teach at about 2 months ago. A kid went up to the 10th floor and jumped. He left a suicide note on his WhatsApp story that was written for his girlfriend. It basically said, I'm paraphrasing, "We never get to see each other, and I always miss you so much it hurts. That's why I'm going to myself." And then he did. One of the other teachers found him outside on the ground bleeding. He's been there for over an hour apparently. In winter, He died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. He was in grade 10 and his girlfriend was in grade 8. I cannot imagine that he put her through. To put that on a 14-year-old is crazy. At my high school, there was this stairwell that people would go fool around in. It got to the point where it was called Blowjob Corner. Almost 30 years later, my son goes to that school. I made a joke to him about staying away from the seaside stairs near the cafeteria. And he said, "You mean Blowjob Corner? They put cameras in because of that." Cut to me with surprised Pikachu face. I got a similar NSFW reason for cameras. So this kid comes back to town. Unusual because everyone who graduates wants to be somewhere else. He fixes teachers' cars in the old auto mechanic classroom. He got hired to teach what he knew how to do. He installed a security camera because that classroom was bare, and he added auto mechanic gear and classroom gear to it. He invested in the room. A car pulled up, then a while later another. A woman went from her car to the other and it started bouncing. I'm sure you can infer what happened in the cars. Well, at the teacher party, he showed the video off thinking it was funny. Now there are cameras with overlapping view everywhere throughout the district. Committing crimes with surveillance, 2 security guards, and a police officer is laughable. Probably will happen more as loopholes are found. All I've heard are locker searches that found drugs or knives. Some guy in college sat in front of me in a studio. We were on stools, so there was no back to the chair. He had his phone in his back pocket, screen facing out with rough playing on his phone. He had his headphones on. I wasn't the only one who noticed, but I certainly didn't want to break the silence by telling him. I was attending a community college at the time, and we were waiting for the professor to come in before Kel. One dude, probably in his 40s, sat at the back with the monitor against the wall, so we could all see that he was intently looking at a threesome with ads flashing all around his screen. I'm still wondering what was up with him. Maybe addiction. I was playing an open mic at a bar and the host was setting up. He kept asking the bartender to turn off the radio, and the bartender kept saying he had already turned it off. Still, everyone could hear something playing, but we weren't sure what it was. I turned to my left and I see this mid-50s looking gentleman. He was dressed corporate casual and eating a nice pub dinner. In one hand he held his phone, which was playing hardcore without any headphones. I asked him politely to turn it off, and he did. Weirdest part was he looked embarrassed after I asked him. Like, how do you get to that point while still having the capacity to feel shame? The bullied kid, other than myself, absolutely losing his goddamn mind and beating the hell out of his bully. There was blood everywhere, mostly on the kid. He was punching, he was kicking, he was slamming his head against a bench, he bit part of his ear off. No lying, he almost ate him. Broke several ribs, several fingers, his ankle, jaw. Apparently he had a ton of mental health issues and deliberately stopped taking his meds just so he was unhinged enough to do that to the bully. People talked about it for years after it happened. A buddy of mine became a teacher there. It still apparently gets mentioned. It's like a folktale, over 18 years later. A milder version of this happened in my school. My friend was of slight build, raised in Germany, born in Italy, perfect target for bullying in my small Midwestern town to where his family had unfortunately transplanted. One big dude who fancied himself a cowboy, who wore boots with spurs and had a plug of chaw in his mouth at all times, bullied a lot of kids. He would intimidate my friend, yell at him, make fun of his accent, etc., and get in his face, push him around. My friend was actually a little on the impulsive and wild side. He just totally hid that side of himself in school, mainly because of the relentless bullying. Anyway, one day he had had enough, suddenly jumped on this cowboy's back like a goddamn gazelle, grabbed his head as they both headed for the floor, and proceeded to smack this guy's head into the concrete a couple of times. Thank God a hall monitor was nearby and pulled him off. I thought for sure he was going to him. My friend got a lot of detention, but no charges were filed by the family because I think they knew what a sadistic they had raised. Kid came back to school after a week looking bruised up. Didn't bully another kid again. In grade 2, my teacher made all students step on a child as they walked into class because he left his lunchbox on the steps in front of the kel. This child was mixed race, and this was in the 80s, and in apartheid South Africa, those who refused got hit with a cane for not listening to their teacher. Supremely messed up, and I will never forget it. She was fired a year or two later for various messed up things. I went to kindergarten in the late 80s in America. My teacher was this horrible old woman who would get in your face and scream at you for the smallest of reasons. One time I asked her if I could go to the bathroom and she said no. I asked again a little bit later and again she said no. I ended up having an accident and had to let her know. I was sent to the office to wait for my parents to bring a change of clothes. My teacher decided the best course of action would be to march the whole class past the administration offices where I was seated and have them all point and laugh at me. I sometimes think about Googling her name and finding the cemetery she's buried in so I can go piss on her grave. That has lived with me for 35 years and is only slightly less embarrassing than when I decided in first grade to read my love poem to my crush in front of the whole kell. Even the teacher tried to stop me and save me from myself. Once saw a teacher fully dump out a teenage girl's bag because he was convinced she stole one of his pens, exposing her pads, tampons, phone, hairbrush, etc. Also her diary, which some random kid picked up and started reading out loud while laughing. Exposing her life at home where her mom and dad are mentally abusive towards her. All the kids made fun of her and the teacher was just screaming her about a freaking pen. She ran out and about 20 minutes later the teacher found the pen under his papers. She transferred schools. I had a psych professor who just disappeared in the middle of the semester. We came to class and someone new walked in and said they were asked to sub for us that day but they had no idea why. Ended up subbing the rest of the semester. Turns out some students who followed his Instagram saw that he had finally proposed to his girlfriend of like 10 years and they presumably just up and left together. He was always telling us about how he'd been wanting to do it but didn't have the guts to. So kind of weird, but I guess it turned out okay for everyone and we were all just proud of him. My gym teacher also taught health education. He would sit at the front of the class in his mesh shorts and no boxers and teach us about education. His would sometimes be visible. We had a class of 40 boys and 6 girls and apparently us girls were pretty naive cause we all brushed it off as an repetitive accident. In hindsight, as an adult, that hole was showing his to teenagers on purpose and we were all too dumb and scared to realize. He was real handsy in gym too. It's not the worst story, but still super gross. When I was at 1-2 grades, we had this extremely friendly janitor who could be found in his small office, and he would close the door and give you some candies. I heard about this and never believed my friends, but I decided to go see him on one of the breaks. I know what you think, but stay with me. I knocked, he opened and asked me what my name was and what I would like to do when I grow up. He gave me the candies and said thank you for visiting. Yep, just a normal dude who likes kids. Also, we had computer class where we were taught stuff like Paint, Word, PowerPoint. We had about 20 Pentium 1 computers. One day, all the computers were gone, disappeared. And so was he, the candy-giving nice dude.